him. There's no NDA involved. You just sat up there and basically told the world, he's ours, but we ain't going to use him.
Yeah. And they didn't give parameters of what it would take to reinstate
They gave
him.
no parameters of what it would take for reinstatement. They didn't specify what punishment they gave him beyond suspending him for the year. Is he getting his salary for this upcoming season? Has it been cut in half? I told he's only getting about 50% of it. Has that been cut in half?
Characterized as a significant financial penalty.
So you've got that going on. And I'm going to say this again. It said in the numerous news reports, it was a consensual relationship that violated organizational policy. So only he is in violation of the company policy. The woman who elected to have a consensual relationship with him is not in violation. He gets to get mentioned and put on Front Street. We don't know who she is. What about the other women within the Celtics organization who have been victimized because wrong assumptions have been made by their involvement? If you knew exactly who it was, that would alleviate the concerns of all the other women who have had their names paraded out into the streets. What about them? You ain't thinking about that. So here we are. We're throwing him out to pasture. And again, Ime Udoka cannot be defended. His actions are his actions. Nobody fights for black coaches more than me. But I am telling you, a firing would have been warranted. Or you keep him. But to keep him, yet suspend him, by the way, not just suspend him, but for the suspension to be indefinite.
It's almost worse, like a lame duck status.
That's what you did. You ruined his career for the next few years. He did it. He did his action. But
NBA reporter and host of NBA Today, our friend Malika Andrews. Malika, do you have us?
I've got you, Molly. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being with us. And obviously, you had the statement from Udoka that was given to you. What's your reaction now after hearing the press conference?
Well, Molly, thank you. If I could first start with this. Stephen A., with all due respect, this is not about pointing the finger. Stop. What became apparent to me in this press conference is that we do not have all of the information here. And it was frustrating to me that the Celtics declined to elaborate or to give more specifics about what exactly the rule breaking was that led us to this point. So that I just want to get that out of the way first. But to answer your question, Molly, I think what stood out to me, I think what stood out to me is that Brad Stevens, he was upset. That's what stood out to me about what he termed rampant Twitter BS is the word that he used, that women were unfairly dragged into this within the Celtics organization. You could see that Brad Stevens was visibly upset about this. And I also found that to be gross and unnecessary, that folks were bringing in the names and the images of women that is just not a fact. That was purely speculation. And so to me, that is what stood out. But the Celtics as an organization could have done more, and short of doing more ahead of this yesterday, they could have owned that responsibility in this press conference. I understand that there were legal parameters that they had to operate within for everybody involved, and I appreciate the fact that they brought in outside counsel and did a thorough organization. And I think that that is something that was clearly necessary in this situation. But the fact that it was able to go on all day, the fact that we are sitting here debating whether somebody else should have been suspended or not, we are not here, Stephen A., to further blame women. That is not why we are here.
First of all, let me be very clear. I don't appreciate where you're going with that. I'm not blaming anybody but Ime Udoka. He deserves, the fact of the matter is, I've said he deserved to be fired if they were going to fire him. If you're not going to fire him, then don't fire him. My issue is all of this being publicized. The point that I'm trying to make is just like you're not mentioning. Excuse me. I listened to you. You're the one telling me to stop on my show. It ain't happening. Okay, that's number one. Number two, I've already said he deserves to be fired or he deserves to be there and handle it internally and privately. If you're not going to handle it privately, if you're going to publicize it in that fashion, then obviously it provokes everybody wanting to know, okay, well, who are the parties involved? When you have Amina Smith in Boston and other women pointing out the fact that there were women who were wrongly implicated in all of this, it's a disservice to them. I didn't come out with the report about a consensual relationship. I didn't come out with the report ahead of time leaking that they were going to suspend him for the year. They did that. And my point is, considering how pervasive this kind of stuff has existed in professional sports for many years, my whole point is that, excuse me, make sure that you handle it in the same fashion it has always been handled. You could have fired him, and then we could have speculated till the cows come home, but he's gone. But to keep him there, keep him employed, but in the same breath, suspend him for a year, then also that year is indefinite. That is the issue that I have. Nobody's trying to protect Ime Udoka, and certainly nobody is trying to protect, is to excoriate the women involved or anything like that. I'm talking about how things of this matter are usually handled from an HR perspective, from an organizational perspective. That is not consistent with what we have seen throughout the years. That is the only point that I was trying to make. I'm not trying to attack anybody. And if anybody deserves to be attacked, it's Ime Udoka for putting himself in this position. I've made that very clear. I'm just talking about you got owners and everybody else. They know the kind of stuff that's going on. You didn't say anything about anybody else. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about them. They didn't say anything about everybody else all the other times this stuff has happened. But now when it comes to him, it's all over the place. That is my issue. That is my only issue.
I appreciate that clarity.
That he will.
One thing, Zach, that you touched on was just this gross focus on identifying unnecessarily women's names that may or may not be involved. And I think it is it isn't too harsh to say that that was a failure by many people, including folks within our own industry. And Brad Stevens actually addressed that today. I want everyone to take a listen.
We have a lot of talented women in our organization, and I thought yesterday was really hard on them. And I think that nobody can control Twitter speculation and rampant, but I do think that we as an organization have a responsibility to make sure we're there to support them now, because a lot of people were dragged unfairly into that.
I want to bring in our NBA analyst, Kendrick Perkins, into this conversation because, Perk, you played for the Celtics organization. What were your thoughts on this message here?
Well, one, to me, I didn't like Brad's comments on this, and let me explain why. Not the fact that he was taking up and protecting the women in the organization, but he said about the speculations and the Twitter BS and things to that nature, and how unfair it was to the women in the organization that is not involved with this particular situation. And I get that, right? But why is it speculations? It's speculations because of the reports that were put out by the actual Boston Celtics. So they didn't do a great job from the jump of actually protecting the women in their organization, because knowing that they were going to sit up here and give out this information and go out here and suspend Ime Udoka and talk about, just give a little details, is going to have people speculating. And in my eyes, I feel like the ball, not only in protecting their entire franchise, but in protecting the women as well, and also the players. Think about this for a second. It's no way in hell that everyone in this organization didn't know about this situation over the last however many months, probably the last year, right? Everybody knew about it. So now you're bringing players involved. Nobody's even talking about how the players are going to be affected. Nobody's going to be talking about how maybe the players are going to get called into office and have to deal with a situation or talk about a situation when they really shouldn't have to be doing that anyway, because everybody knew about it. So my thing was this: before this came out publicly, before they decided to make a decision, they should have made sure that they crossed their T's and dotted their I's before they put this information out. And I get it. Now we're to this point, and now he had to go on here and he had to say this and he had to say that to protect those innocent women. But at the end of the day, man, it just ain't right how they went about it.
And Perk, I have to agree with you to some degree, because a lot of times the Celtics, what they got right was probably the process, bringing someone in externally and handling an investigation. But the proliferation of the information is what dragged the women through the mud. And to me, as a woman who works in the sports industry, and you know a lot of these colleagues, it just is unfair what they've had to deal with. And even though the intentions were right, the way that the messaging went out and how it was handled, that's another way that you have to look in the mirror as an organization and say, when we're in times like this, and I think everyone around the NBA is looking, when we're in times like this, unfortunately, you God forbid, but if there's a situation, we have to make sure everyone's protected as we're releasing this information. And I think to Zach's point, I know you said you didn't agree, Perk, about, Brad Stevens and his comments. I think what you saw there was the president of basketball operations feeling, disheartened based on the experiences he's had, because he's now no longer in that head coach role where you handle the X's and O's. Instead, he's probably the one that's the face to face and having plethora of conversations with these women, seeing them being distraught or even just having to manage that. I think that's what you're seeing more so from Brad Stevens, not necessarily saying that, everything that they handled was perfect.
Right. And listen, I agree to that aspect, but here's the thing, too. The word accountability, okay? Accountability doesn't just go to Ime Udoka, okay? Accountability goes to the other people that played a part in that as well. Let me tell you another thing I didn't like about my good friend Wick Grossbeck and Brad Stevens in this press conference when they asked, is anybody else going to be punished? And they said no. And my whole thing is this, right? These are some of the facts that have been out. These are some facts that I know that, this relationship, one of these relationships that was had with Ime Udoka and one of these women, it was consensual, meaning that this woman actually played a part in it too. So my thing is, yes, Ime Udoka was wrong. We get that. His punishment, he deserved that, and whatever else follows, I hate it for him, but he put himself in this position. But why are the other people getting left off the hook?
Well,
that's the
Kendrick,
problem that I have right now. Everybody got to be held accountable.
I think that we need to circle back to what Shanae said, is that there was an investigation that was conducted by an independent law firm here. And I think that transparency is what will rule the day here. And so without having all of the information, it is unfair and irresponsible of us to go and to speculate on that, because what we have to...
Well, I'm not speculating.
Sure.
I have the information. I'm not speculating.
But what we have to go with here is the fact that an independent law firm came in, did this investigation, and the facts that they were presented, they came to the conclusion that Ime Udoka violated a policy that warranted a 1-year suspension. And I share your frustration with the lack of transparency, while understanding that there is some things that they need to, from a legal perspective, keep private. But knowing all of that, understanding all of that, we have to come to the conclusion that whatever rule, the conduct that was broken on one side, it is not the same on the other side. I thank you for your perspective. We will revisit this story later in our show. We also have a little bit of basketball to get to, so still to come on NBA Today. Hear what Steve Kerr had to say about Steph Curry. And is Giannis the best player in the league? Plus, fresh off her... If we look to when we're back here in September, how